Hello, welcome one and all to the 31st episode of Dylan Explains Everything. My name's Dylan. In case you couldn't tell by the title, I'm the one explaining everything, including the topic of today, the truth about Jesus' birth. Now, whether you're a Christian or not, you have to admit that Jesus was born. Even historians agree on this. They also agree that the Bible is actually a pretty good historical source for a lot of things that were going around, especially in the New Testament, when they can actually prove a lot of the stuff was going on at the same time. So I'm going to be pulling sources from the Bible, but I'm not going to be necessarily saying that the Bible is completely true. All right, so those of you who aren't Christians don't have to be concerned about that. Since it's getting to Christmas time, even though some people don't like to celebrate it this early, I do. So I'm going to start making episodes that are at least loosely based around Christmas, just to start getting into the spirit, including today's episode, which is going to be talking about why Christmas is an inaccurate day for Jesus' birth. In fact, we can talk about this by talking about when Christmas comes from. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is how in Norse countries, they would actually burn logs at the end of the winter solstice to celebrate the end of the worst time of winter. These logs would normally burn for about 12 days, hence the 12 days of Christmas. And since it was the middle of winter, they had recently killed most of their animals and made most of their wine. So they had tons of food to eat and drinks to drink, which is also why a lot of people celebrate by eating huge feasts and sometimes drinking wine. In Rome, they also celebrated a holiday called Saturnalia, which celebrated the god Saturn, or the god of agriculture. They also celebrated around this time Juvenalia, which celebrated children. On December 25th, they specifically celebrated a god called Mithra, which was the unconquerable sun. So first of all, how do we know it wasn't winter when Jesus was born? Well, there's a couple things in the Bible that really point to this. The first thing is that shepherds were watching over their sheep in Luke 2:8. They wouldn't be watching over their sheep outside because it's winter, the sheep would freeze, so it'd be inside. However, they wouldn't be able to see the star outside if they were inside, so therefore they weren't inside, it wasn't winter. And if that's not enough to convince you maybe it was a bit warmer where they were, well, why were Joseph and Mary traveling when they gave birth to Jesus? They were going to register in a Roman census. Luke 1:1 says, "At that time Augustus Caesar set in order that all people under Roman rule must list their names in a register." This is a census. They didn't have Roman censuses during winter because people in northern parts would have to travel across freezing weather conditions and horrible roads. They only did them during fall, spring, or summer. So when was Jesus actually born? Let's find a pretty good estimate for when he was born. Well, the first thing we need to note is that in Luke 1:24, it says that John's mom, John the Baptist, his mom was in her 6th month of pregnancy when Jesus was conceived. Now, the time that John was conceived, his father was doing a special service that only happened between June 13th and 19th. That's when historians have found it happening. That's when he found out that John had been conceived, and then 9 months later, John was born. So we have to add 6 months to June in order to find the time when Jesus was conceived. This brings us to December. Now we have to add 9 months until Jesus was born, which brings us to September. Around September is when Jesus was born, possibly late September, possibly early October, whenever. Jesus was born around that time. However, some people have actually been able to use astronomy and a few other sciences to find a more accurate date, specifically one day. Around the time that Jesus was born, there was a comet that was made. Now, this comet would have looked like a star in the sky, hence the star Bethlehem that led the wise men and the shepherds to Jesus. Now, this comet occurred on October 20th, 6 BC, and a lot of historians agree that there was some sort of signal that would have led people to Jesus. So it's possible that Jesus' birthday was October 20th, 6 BC. Notice how it's not 0 BC. Common misconception is that Jesus was born in 0 BC. This wasn't the case, most likely. Now, there was another estimate where someone pointed out how there were 2 planets that would have aligned around the time that Jesus could have been born, and it would have looked like an even brighter star in the sky. This happened around September 15th, 6 BC. This would make a lot of sense because we've already proven that it was sometime around September. So it's entirely possible that Jesus' birthday was September 15th, 6th BC. So what we can say is that Jesus was not born during winter. In fact, he was probably born during fall, specifically around September. And what we can estimate is that he might have been born around September 15th or October 20th, sometime between 6 BC and maybe even 3 BC. Now, before I go, I'd like to point out a few other misconceptions that people get about Jesus. Even atheists who don't believe that Jesus was holy should also know these problems because they're very popular in pop culture and they're just wrong. There's no source that would prove this, and there's so many just common sense things that would prove against this. The first of which would be the name of Jesus. In the Bible, anytime anyone ever mentions Jesus, and outside of the Bible, anytime anyone ever talked about Jesus in Hebrew or Greek or anything like that, they called him Yeshua. That would have been his actual name, which would translate in English to Joshua. Now, we can't use this because there's a book of the Bible called Joshua and there's other people called Joshua, and it would just be a huge problem. So people instead translated it to Jesus. Another misconception is that Jesus was white. He was not. He was born in the Middle East, specifically in Bethlehem. His parents were from Nazareth. They were Jewish. They were from the Middle East. They would have at least been darker skinned. They were not white. And the last thing that a lot of people get insanely wrong is the nativity scene. Now, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is the wise men. A lot of people depict the wise men at the nativity scene giving gifts to Jesus. According to the Bible, this is completely inaccurate. They did not come to Jesus when he was born. In fact, it says in Matthew 2:11, they came to the house where the child was. Jesus was not born in a house. So therefore, they came to him after he had already been born for at least a little bit. Some people have placed it at around 3 years, just depending on the journey they had to make. Some people have chosen other times, but we don't know exactly. We just know that the wise men were not there. There's a few other things wrong with the nativity scene and just about misconceptions about Christmas in general, but I'm going to save those for another day so I have more material to work with while the holiday season is going on. So I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope you're not offended because I talked about religion a little bit. I'm not saying you should believe in a religion, and I tried to be as historically accurate as possible while filming this and scripting this. So if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to let me know. If you have any thoughts, questions, or suggestions, leave them in the comments below. Stay tuned for next week's video, which always comes out Saturday at 10 a.m. And remember, my name's Dylan, and I explain everything.